This podcast is brought to you by EnergyX. Are you tired of paying huge rates to the big cloud providers? Are you worried about being booted off a cloud platform if your company doesn't meet their ever-shifting standards? Ready to step up your data security and disaster recovery game? Well, ladies and gentlemen, your new cloud is ready. Introducing xCloud, the scalable, resilient computing cloud that is also actually affordable. It's high-performance compute for half the cost. HPC for HTC. xCloud from Red Team is opening a beta program for new cloud computing customers, and that means you, my friend. The xCloud is powered by the XMDC immersion-cooled modular data center from EnergyX. I've seen this data center in operation, and it is a total game changer. So if you want more information about the beta launch, go to the URL in the description. Type in promo code BETA, B-E-T-A, for 50% off of your first instance. And so the URL is going to be digitalwildcatters.com/EnergyX. What is up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Oil and Gas Startups Podcast. Man, I was just talking about, we've been doing this thing for a long time, getting into it. So glad to have a new friend, Steven Fipke, InflowControl, here with me in the studio. Steven, welcome.
Thanks. Glad to be here. Big fan. Recently discovered you guys, though, mostly around the Fuse event that you hosted here recently, which opened my eyes to the whole space that you guys are working in. I was glad to be able to participate in that.
Well, thanks for coming out, man. Well, walk us through really quickly, kind of high level, what is it that Inflow does, and then we'll kind of dive into your backstory.
Sure. We're kind of a cross between an oil field service company and a technology company, in the sense that the company's headquarters in Norway, in a little fishing village on the south coast of Norway, by three founders who developed a really cool way to manage your reservoir autonomously. We call it the autonomous inflow control device, right? Just like a little valve you can put down in your reservoir. And if you're producing oil, it's wide open. And if water or gas starts to break through, it autonomously senses that fluid viscosity and starts to restrict that flow. So we're about 10 years old at this point, but still very much startup growth phase. Myself, I'm the only employee here in the United States of America, but I love it because it's a blank slate for me to find opportunities to utilize this technology for different types of assets and reservoirs.
So what is the use case? Is this something that it makes sense to install in every well? Is there certain conditions?
Not every well, but yeah, there are certainly conditions. We have to do a lot of background work before we decide if it's a suitable application.
Okay.
So that's why we have a team of 10 reservoir engineers on staff, most of them in Norway, that collect operator data, do a wellbore simulation and say, yeah, okay, this looks great for your reservoir, or no, we need to try something else, something different. But the best case scenario is like a water flood where you've got a lot of water breakthrough problems, or a new oil field with high water cut due to a strong aquifer drive, where water just breaks through everywhere, or just in one area, and you want to be able to control that to get more oil out of that reservoir more quickly. But here in Texas, I actually have 4 wells in the ground now with just the oldest of the oldest brown fields.
Okay.
This Greta Frio trend is just like an hour south of here near Victoria. And another field that's just on the south side of Houston. We have actually 5 wells in Texas where the oil was depleted in the 1970s, old Exxon fields. They blew down the gas cap in the 90s to get that out of the ground. And the Gulf of Mexico has gradually recharged the reservoir hydrodynamically, so where there's actually just a thin layer of oil at the top that's left. There's a few operators, none of the majors are interested in this, but they'll go in and buy up this acreage and try to find that little cream that's left in the top of the reservoir by drilling a well very close to the top of the structure. Mm-hmm. The danger is if you're anywhere near that water, it's a water well, right? So these valves have been shown to be able to control that water. So you're not making 10,000 barrels of water a day. You're making 2,000 barrels of water a day, but also keeping the oil production up for longer.
So how does it actually work? So it detects, we've got some breakthrough, the water cut has changed drastically. What happens next?
Okay, so each little valve, you kind of visualize a multi-stage frac where you got packers and frac sleeves before the plug and perf and cemented liners. it was mostly packers and frac sleeves, swellable packers. And but instead of a frac sleeve, you've got a little section of screen with an autonomous inflow control valve in there, right? So the valve has two main flow paths. One, which can produce, 100 barrels of oil per day if it's open, and then a little siphon tube off the side. Call it the pilot flow. That tube is constantly sampling the viscosity and density of what's coming from the reservoir into the wellbore. So it's viscosity sensitive. And if it's, anything above 1 centipoise oil, so pretty light oils, will keep the valve completely open. But if water breaks through in that compartment of the well, because they've got multiple valves and multiple compartments, the valve says, okay, obviously the viscosity has dropped because there's water or gas coming in here, and I need to start choking it back. And it does this without cables, without control lines, without batteries. It's just simple fluid mechanics.
So how?
Yeah, I didn't tell you how it works.
So is that proprietary or?
Yeah, we have patents and.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, the boss.
Well, give me without telling me the sauce. How does it? Is it shutting it down? Is it just choking it in a way?
Right.
Is it?
It's all public. It's all
okay.
Well patented and protected. Okay. You can go on the website and there's YouTube videos. We have a YouTube channel that explain this, how it works in depth.
You got to put those in Collide Pro.
A lecture series. They're in.
Okay.
Yeah, I signed up last week. So in layman's terms, when that pilot flow, it has two flow elements, right? A laminar flow element, which is a long, thin tube. By nature, any flow through that long, thin tube will be laminar. Laminar flow, the pressure drop for laminar flow is typically a function of viscosity. Then after it goes through that long, thin tube, it comes back into the valve and exits the valve into the tubing or the production liner through what we call a turbulent flow element. Now, turbulent flow elements, the equation for turbulent pressure drop is a function of density. So we can fine tune those, the laminar pressure drop and the turbulent pressure drop, to create enough of a difference between the two to create a back pressure under a piston. And the piston, if it sees any back pressure underneath it, it will move up into the closed position and start choking the well. So it's not on-off. It doesn't immediately close at the first drop of water or gas. But as the water cut gradually increases, that pressure that pushes the piston up to close the valve gets stronger and stronger and stronger until it's 100% watered out, and then it's up in its mostly closed position. So that's how we can control the well without any wires or gadgets or gizmos down there, just fluid mechanics.
So then maybe this is a little educational, but assuming, so this whole process happens, right? It essentially chokes it down. How do we get it back to where it was? Mm-hmm. Are we having to go in and
we have people always ask if you need a sliding sleeve to be able to have a manual default close off position. Mm-hmm. And no, we've never had to do that, Jake. And it's because even if the valve goes into its closed position, it's a dynamic positioning of that piston, right? If there's water there, it'll stay up in its choking position. But if oil comes back for whatever reason, you shut the well in for a week and things move around in the reservoir, you get some oil concentration back, some oil saturation, and then, that pilot flow never closed. That pilot flow is always sampling the reservoir, right? Mm-hmm. So if you do get oil to return to that part of the well that you're controlling with the autonomous inflow control valve, AICV, then it'll sense oil viscosity again and open back up.
Okay. So this is more just a reservoir engineering question. Outside of just shutting in and allowing the oil density to kind of grow, how do you deal with those situations where you just have a massive amount of water all of a sudden take over?
Yeah, it'll choke that well. If it's just, if it's all coming, if it's
what are the other solutions outside of that? Past the valve.
Yeah, that's a very pertinent question, because if you have a little bit of water breaking through at the heel, choke that back, you get more oil from the toe in a horizontal well, right?
Yeah.
Stands to reason. But if it's all oil everywhere, all at once, I'm sorry, you've got a bigger problem. And that has happened, right? You've drilled wells straight into the water and it's you'll never. Well, we did that on a well for a small operator. I'm not going to name names, but it was a great project where they drilled south of Victoria here in Texas. It's the old Greta Frio trend. And they drilled a screen well. They've been doing this for maybe 5 or 10 years. It's the old Frostwood business model, if you will, of buying up this depleted reservoir and trying to drill wells at the top and just rip on it with a big ESP and try to get whatever you get. right?
Yeah.
It's hit or miss. 4 out of 10 assets are economic, but there's money to be made there. So what this company did was they drilled a horizontal well with screens and just regular sand screens. Because it's an unconsolidated formation, it will produce sand. So they put the screens in one well. And on the same pad, they put AICV, autonomous devices, in a well that's right beside it. Side-by-side comparison. Mm-hmm. One of the very few that exist in the world. Unfortunately, they were both in the water, right? So they switched on this screen well, 2,500 foot long lateral. They had 40 or 50 joints of screens in this well, 5,000 barrels of water, and no oil. This is despite having drilled like a vertical delineation well that showed good oil saturation in this part of the rock. So they were optimistic. They found a good spot to drill. Like, this isn't good. Then, we'll switch on this AICV well beside it and see what happens there. Well, wasn't great. It wasn't anything to write home about. But that well has been online now for about 3 years. It only ever makes about 2,000 barrels of water per day. But guess what? It's been hanging in there at 60 or 70 barrels of oil per day. Steady, flat line, no decline.
Oil. That's good oil.
It's sellable oil, right? Yeah. Probably this company's only commercial cash flow at this point in time. Yeah. But, it's stayed that way. And, I still am really good friends with the reservoir engineer for that company. And he's like, this is an oil finder. You're not wrong. It's not the real premise about how we design these wells, just to find whatever residual oil saturation's down there. But in this case, that's what it's doing.
That's exciting. So give me a little more about your background. Let's go into more background of the company. Like, I'm curious, is this the only thing you guys do, or do you guys do other things? How did this kind of come about? But let's go more into your background.
Sure. You
get a little bit of an accent here. I'm going to assume you're probably from Calgary.
Very good. Yeah. Wow. Edmonton.
Okay. Yeah. A little bit broader. You mentioned you've been on Negotiate's podcast. Shout out to Justin. Love you, dude.
Yep. Justin rocks.
Yeah. So give me more background about you.
Sure. Graduated petroleum engineering in 2000, I guess. Yeah. So
really dating yourself there.
A while ago. Yeah. Should have said that. But I tell my friends I've been in oil and gas since I was 5 years old.
Child labor.
Yeah. So my dad was always in the industry, a rig hand straight out of high school. Yeah. He was more technical, though, a smart guy. But he worked for Aramco Hess when I was a kid, right? So ever since I was 5 years old, I'd go out and check the gas wells in the Wilson Creek oil field with him. And grew up with the smell of gas condensate all around and riding my bicycle around it's out in the country, right? We didn't have paved roads, so we'd go to the plant and ride around the cement tracks on our bicycle because it was smoother, that kind of thing, right? Then he started up a couple of companies after that. A little bit of an entrepreneur. He started up a pump jack optimization company and then a plunger lift company, and then finished his career consulting as a fracker, wells company man. Did that for probably 15 years. So when it came time for me to go to engineering, a lot of my buddies were going into civil. And he said, no son of mine is going to be a civil engineer. You shall apply to the petroleum engineering program. And thank you, Dad. Yeah, he helped me a lot there because it's been a great career. Unfortunately, when I graduated in 2000 was kind of a downturn. I don't know. The Canadian market's a bit more sensitive than the US market in the sense that the oil prices for heavy oil are discounted from West Texas Intermediate. So when we get a downturn, it bites harder in Calgary. And, the guys who graduated from petroleum engineering the year prior, 1999, they were bartending still because they couldn't find oil and gas jobs.
Yeah.
Or they're out in the field, drilling and stuff. But I got lucky. It wasn't my plan A, but I had done an internship with Halliburton. Actually, it was Sperry. Before Sperry was Halliburton. Okay. So I had done MWD in the field. They didn't usually hire. I was a co-op student, an intern, if you will, with Sperry. They created a new lower pay grade for guys like me who were still students and sent us all over. I would drive thousands of kilometers between jobs from northeast British Columbia down to southeast Saskatchewan. And just MWDing, measurement well drilling for those who don't know it. And that's, dirty rig work for the most part. Once you get your stuff set up, you're just sitting there taking surveys, steering the wells for the directional drillers. So I had this background in directional drilling, which was nice because when I got out of school, I was qualified for this weird little mini PSL. Halliburton calls them product service lines, PSLs, called multilaterals. And so I don't know what this is, but hey, it's a job. I signed on with them. And turns out this little team of like 6 guys in Nisku, Canada, shout out to Nisku, was running the entire global product line for multilateral junctions. Doing wells with multiple legs off of them, one vertical hole, and then do, stacked multilaterals in different layers of the reservoir, or drill 2 different directions like this, or, pitchfork, crowsfoot. There's a bunch of different multilateral well architecture. So I got to do that and learned really fast, developing new technologies. It was still kind of the wild, wild west for multilaterals. We were building stuff in the workshop, testing it out, and then running it in the field immediately. No vetting of anything. Let's just go try this in someone's well, which was a lot of fun. And that led me, after a few projects in the Middle East, I spent a lot of time in Saudi in those days, a little bit of time in South America. And then one of the hot spots was Venezuela. And Venezuela was blowing and going in the early 2000s, right? Hugo Chavez was already the president, but he was still playing ball. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I started working with those guys a lot more to get this new technology deployed to do these multilateral junctions a little bit better, because they're notoriously risky, right? You can run into heavy duty fishing operations really quickly when you do a multilateral junction and the littlest thing goes wrong. You're now going to spend weeks fishing this stuff out of the hole. So I was helping those guys out, and that led me to a full-time position down there in 2004.
Okay.
So I moved to Venezuela as a 26-year-old guy. Well, from that? Canada. Pretty awesome.
Yeah.
It was like paradise found, right?
Yeah.
Like going from the Canadian winters to a tropical paradise with, I can't say beautiful ladies, but I married a Venezuelan lady, so I can say that, I guess. And then, 25 cents for a beer, $2 for a bottle of rum the size of your arm. It was great times. And
how long were you down there?
I was 4 years almost.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the final bell for me was kind of like when Chavez wanted all those international oil companies to switch over to majority PDVSA ownership. So they pushed out Exxon immediately, just like, no, we're going home, have fun. Conoco negotiated for a little while, and I was working primarily on the Petrozahuata field, which was a Conoco field. They all got on the same plane back to Houston on May 7th.
And is it predominantly onshore or offshore there?
That's all onshore.
It's all onshore?
It's the heavy oil stuff, right?
Okay.
So all that expertise I had gotten in Canadian heavy oil applied itself really well to the Canadian Fajad Orinoco stuff, which is 3,000 to 5,000 centipoise, almost bitumen in the reservoir. So that's why the multilaterals worked so good. If you drill a single well, you might get a couple hundred barrels out of it. It's like a single horizontal lateral.
Just the fact that it's thicker?
Yeah, you need some gravity drainage to get that stuff to even flow into your wellbore. So they would do a fishbone style multilateral well with up to 18 different branches off of it, and they'd get 2,000 or 3,000 barrels a day. So Conoco was all in on this stuff. It was really cool. There's probably 300 or 400 multilateral junctions in that field.
How much was it to drill one of these wells?
Oh, back in those days, it was probably, with the multilateral hardware, like $5 or $6 million. But it was cheaper because they wouldn't complete the laterals. They just directional drill them. Yeah. And then the main junctions would be tied back with a cemented junction. That's my part in the process. But the laterals were just open hole. And
Is that standard for the heavy oils? Or was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can still do that in Canada to a large degree. It's still a lot of the cold production, not the thermal stuff.
Yeah.
It has to be cold production, but they do a lot of, we call those level 1 multilaterals, where you just, turn the directional drilling BHA over to the side and then push out and create a new hole. It may collapse, it may not, but it still connects up these different, reservoir compartments, and it makes
I've never
sense.
Heard of that. That's awesome.
No? Oh, it's good fun. Yeah.
I'm not an engineer, so.
Yeah. So then I had to leave when everybody else left. I was probably one of the last expats in Maturin, Venezuela, because I was pretty committed. And if it weren't for Hugo Chavez, I would probably still be there. having a great time. But all the international companies pulled out, and a few months later, I landed here in Houston, Texas.
So is really quickly a side tangent, is the state of the industry there in Venezuela the same as it was when you left?
Oh, yeah. It was fun to be there, right? Because you'd get these PDVSA guys that were nominated by, it became a political organization, PDVSA, Petróleos de Venezuela is what that means, state oil company. They'd come in and say, we're going to grow this business to 5 million barrels a day. At the time, there were about 3.5, and it looked feasible for them to get to 5 million barrels a day in 2006, 2007, until it just became inhospitable to international oil companies. And so they all pulled out, and then oil pricing was still strong up until about the global housing crisis probably did them in, right?
Mm-hmm.
The global recession, 2008, 9, 10. Because then there was less demand for oil, and Chavez was taking all their funds and diverting it into social projects and, free heating oil for the poor folks in the Northeast of the United States, right? And subsidizing Cuba's energy. And they just didn't have any cash after that, stopped investing in the infrastructure in, I want to say, 2010, and it's just been a slow motion downward death spiral since then, to where, like, when I was there, it was 3.5 million barrels a day for the country. Up until the sanctions came off Venezuela a couple of months ago, they were down to a few 100,000 barrels per day of oil exports. Even with Chevron can now sell oil again, because they got that sanction removed or waived from the State Department. They're only able to get it up to about 700,000 barrels a day. And that's mostly coming from the light oil fields, Jake. The heavy oil stuff is all shut in.
So have they started to play nice in recent years to get the Exxons and the other guys to come back in?
Well, they're trying to.
But it was like, well, we've already been bit by this once.
Yeah, once bitten, twice shy. So the condition for these sanctions being waived was for Maduro, Chavez's successor, to host free and fair elections, right?
Has that panned out?
Did he do that? Absolutely not. Nobody voted. And the only way he could get the few people to vote that did vote was by threatening to annex, 2/3 of Guyana's landmass. So I don't know if you know the relationship between Venezuela and Guyana.
Not really.
Guyana's the
they're
global hotspot.
Pretty close to each other. Yeah, we actually went and toured Exxon's campus with some friends who were on the Guyana project, and so that was just like the talk of the town. And
yeah, I was down in Guyana in October for a workshop with a lot of the Exxon guys there.
Wow.
Yeah, it's tiny. There's more people in 10 times as many people in Houston as there is in Guyana.
That's crazy.
It's only 700,000. We're like 7 million here, right?
Yeah.
Did I do the math right? 100 times. Anyway, a lot of those oil fields, offshore oil fields in Guyana, if you were to draw a line straight off the coast, they would fall under the Zona de Esquiva, which, based on a 1899 treaty with the Spanish and the British, belongs to Guyana. The vote that Maduro did on the weekend, just on Sunday,
this past weekend,
was one of the referendum questions was, shall we recognize that treaty? No or no? Yes or no? But clearly everybody voted to, for, in the spirit of nationalism, to reclaim the Zona Esquiva, which will never happen because, it's probably pretty well protected by the U.S. Navy, given all the ExxonMobil infrastructure off the coast there. So, I don't know if the sanctions are going to stay waived, but they are for the time being, which makes Chevron quite happy because they've been investing in that country for 40 or 50 years and haven't been able to get anything out of it for the Trump administration put the sanctions in place probably in 2018.
I feel like there is so much opportunity internationally, but like the top of mind risk is always like the political risk of these governments that are not stable, leaders that are not stable. You can get kicked out at any point in time. A couple of years ago, there was the whole Citco 5 here in the Woodlands and the whole bribery thing that went down. And it was just like, if you look at it, it was like they were kind of, in my understanding, doing business the way the business is done down there. And in order to make things happen, there could have been some things that were kind of obviously like kind of across the lines, but the U.S. Justice Department came down on there very heavily. And I know one of the guys who was involved in the investigation on that, and it's interesting.
Oh, it's
Interesting. Now they're all in prison. So it's like I don't know. It doesn't really like make you want to go outside the borders and just invest a ton of cash into something.
No, it's very discouraging to foreign direct investment, right? And that's what they need at this point. They do not have the cash to rebuild the Venezuelan oil and gas industry. I have a huge community of Venezuelan people that I'm friends and family with, right? And they're all waiting for their chance to go back. They're loyal to the country and to the industry. Talented people. They had a fantastic reservoir engineering program for the folks that came out of PDVSA in the 80s and 90s. So they're good engineers, good geologists. They all want to go back and fix it.
Yeah.
But they can't do it without money. And who's going to invest? Well, the only one who's still there playing ball is Chevron at this point, and Shell to a tiny degree. But everybody else is like, no, we're out of here. And I need to correct a statement that I said earlier. The Jamaica field is one of the traditional Chevron heavy oil fields that is still operating. I don't know to what extent, what production levels. Yeah, it's going to be a long road for them to get back to where they were. And they have the world's largest oil reserves. If you jiggle around the recovery factors for extra heavy oil, which Chavez did. And they say the last drop of oil this world ever consumes will probably come out of Venezuela. The problem is, what's the timeline for that? How long are we going to be interested in extra heavy oil from a South American dictatorship?
What is the estimate on reserves in Guyana? Do you know?
In Guyana, I don't know, because they're still doing discovery and appraisal and a lot of Guyana stuff, right? But they're up to 28 discoveries, and they announce a new one every month.
And it's all offshore, right?
All offshore, yeah. Which is safe, right? You can't get taken over as easily if you're offshore, right?
Much harder.
Much harder. But this whole theme of, oh, come on in, American oil company, invest in our country, build up a great oil field. Ecuador is a classic example, right? Texaco built that oil industry. And once it looks good enough to where the president at the time says, oh, that's lovely, I'll be having that. Good luck. See you later. They just write off the investment and go to international business court and spend 20 years trying to get a settlement, which is what Texaco had to do, right? No, when Conoco left that Petrozaguata field, they wrote off $14 billion in Q4. 14 billion. That's wild. It's a huge number. Yes, they had already made a profit on that investment, I'm quite sure, but they had a lot of invested.
All right, so you leave the wonderful land of Venezuela, you land back in Houston. What was next?
Yeah, back in Houston, got married, started a family. And then Houston wasn't my destination of choice, but it is, in my opinion, the global capital of oil and gas. So I was happy to be here. Yeah. And now of all kinds of energy, as I learned from Fuse, this is going to be the hub for hydrogen.
It really is.
CO2, all that stuff is going to happen here. I love that. But no, I liked Houston. Halliburton offered me an opportunity then to go to the Middle East, which I still had strong connections to from before. So they sent me to Dubai in 2010.
I only hear amazing things about Dubai.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. 10 years ago, this was. It was
still early then.
It was still early. There were still empty sand.
You were too early.
sections between the giant malls, right? But it was nice. It still had a kind of a local feel. You could still. I went back last year in February for meetings, and it's Manhattan. You can't move. There's people on top of you. It's stressful. Like the old Dubai was kind of relaxed, and I miss that. But that was a good place to live, especially at that point in time. The kids were little and they had a nanny, things you don't typically do living in the U.S. So it was great. But at that point in time, I was 10 or 12 years with Halliburton, and I was kind of at a fork in my career. So keep doing this. They were offering me a position as like a business development manager in Kuwait, and I was interested, right? But I thought, if I go into that level of Halliburton management, it's the profit loss pressure cooker every month, and you're only as good as your latest thinking forecast, and that's your life, So I took a bit of a sabbatical and went to work for Saudi Aramco in 2012.
Were you in Saudi at the time, or were you here in the States?
That was a funny thing. So I hired on while I was still in Dubai. And Halliburton's like, oh, wish you well. Thank you. Shout out to Halliburton. They never treated me bad ever. Because you're going to work for an operator, they're going to treat you well on the way out. So they put me in Saudi for 5 or 6 months just to get trained, quote unquote. But then the idea behind the group that hired me, which was the upstream R&D group, XPEC ARC, research and development, 300 scientists and engineers developing new technology, very academic focused, to be honest, very, patentable IP focused. They wanted to have, it makes no sense that they hired a Canadian to do this, but a person in Scotland to work as a liaison out of a satellite research center and scout the North Sea for new technologies. It was cool as shit, Jake. I'm not lying.
So they move you from Saudi to
Aberdeen.
So you just hung out in Aberdeen. What was your day to day? Were you, because you said technologies kind of specifically?
Yeah, upstream. So I was with the production technology team within the XPEC organization, which has its own building in Saudi. Like they are, very associated with University of King Fahd and all that stuff. But I was in a new office that they'd built out for us by myself for a while because I was the first one they'd hired for this role. And I just started talking to folks in Scotland who were doing acoustic telemetry for downhole data. Mm-hmm. Started talking to folks who were doing, downhole sensing, reservoir resistivity and pressure measurements distributed through the reservoir. And then one of the things that really caught my interest was autonomous ICDs. So when I say ICDs, inflow control device is kind of the broadest category. And then you can narrow that down into autonomous ICDs as a narrower category. Those are the ones that an ICD chokes your well in a planned way, but it's just a fixed nozzle. You're basically putting a hole in your pipe that gives you the flow rates that you want at a certain drawdown pressure. Autonomous are the ones that can change based on what you're producing. That caught my interest in 2013.
So how long were you with Saudi Aramco?
As good as that job was, a year and a half was all I lasted, even though they had me on this wonderful compensation package to live in the northeast of Scotland. It was a little bit hard to implement change in an organization as big as Saudi Aramco. I was getting great technology ideas. I was taking them back to the kingdom and saying, guys, look at this. This could make a difference. And yeah, okay, that's a great idea. There wasn't enough engagement between XPEC ARC and the assets. And I've said that before and I'll say it again.
So what was the point of the position?
It was just harvesting new ideas and technology.
Yeah, but if there's no utilization of the ideas that you find,
I'd say I could have got those ideas pushed through, but it would have taken me longer than I was willing to wait because I'm impatient. I want to, here's the idea. Let's de-risk it. Let's plan a job. Let's do a test. And let's drill a well. And that takes.
Do you think that's purely just the nature of the size of the company? And so you think you would anticipate you'd probably have the same problems at a Halliburton or on the operator side, Exxon or Chevron, or is that more exclusive to Saudi Aramco?
The way I put this typically is I wanted to work for an operator. The world's largest NOC was a poor choice because they are the slowest ones to implement change. Very progressive now more than they were 10 years ago. I'll give them credit for that. Very much more progressive and quick adopters. But it's a very large crude container that needs to be steered, miles and miles before it docks at port. So it was hard to get things through. But I'll tell you that the personal reason for leaving Scotland was the weather. And my Scottish friends will hate me for saying this, but Aberdeen gets 1 day of sunshine a year.
I couldn't do it.
And my wife is Venezuelan, bro. She's didn't know what to do, didn't know how to dress. It was torture. So we wanted to get back to Houston anyway.
Yeah.
So what I did was I found the coolest ICD company to work with at the time and get myself a position back here in Houston. And that was in 2014.
And so was it Inflow that you landed with, or was another company at first?
No, I had met with Inflow multiple times, but that was their startup phase. Yeah. They were just 3 guys working out of the garage. Very promising tech. I fell in love with this tech because of them. not because of the company I went to work with,
Mhm.
which was Tendek at the time, now Taka. But they had the most commercial product. They were in the troll field in Norway in a big way, controlling gas. So that's an interesting field where they drill this thin oil rim underneath a massive gas cap. So when you have gas breakthrough in those wells, you shut the well in. And those are subsea offshore wells. You don't want to shut those in. Those are $200 million wells. Yeah. Right. So they really needed a solution for gas control in that field. So Tendeka was blowing and going in that space. They brought me in at the Houston office and I populated it out throughout the Western Hemisphere because no one was talking about autonomous ICDs in the Western Hemisphere. So I got to run the first ones in Canada, the first ones in Alaska, the first ones in Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador, and then later on in Texas. So yeah, it's been a fun journey for sure.
So you could be probably one of the world's most experienced peoples in this technology.
Thanks for saying that.
In theory.
Of the ones that are still doing it, yeah, maybe. But there's lots more to do. There's a lot more to do. It's still early days for this technology.
You've spent a lot of time, you said it's been 10 years now kind of working with these kinds of companies. What excites you about this?
Finding different reservoirs. So my boss just had me do a study of all the unconventional basins in the US because they have no idea in Norway. None, right? They just know that like the Permian makes a lot of water. Say, okay, I'll compare the Bakken to the Permian to the Haynesville. Because I know these reservoirs, basins, not as well as the frackers do. But I spent a little bit of time in frack, so I know a little bit. And trying to find ones where the viscosity sensitive device can actually work. And it's not all of them, right? We can't go out to your West Texas well and shut off all your water. Sorry. The light, tight oil that comes out of an unconventional shale or sandy shale reservoir has a pretty low viscosity. And we have to have the oil thicker than the water. Otherwise, the device does the opposite, right? So the only unconventional play where it really works, in my view, is the Bakken. But we just did a 2-well Bakken pilot project where we increased their oil rate. I mean, it was watered out, so it was pretty bad. Rod pump. It was only making, 6 barrels a day. And we brought that up to 30 barrels a day.
That's good.
Yeah, it's not nothing. And it's a little pilot project demonstrating proof of concept. So we were really thrilled about that. We just put that case study up on our website.
Is that the paper that you're writing?
That's a different paper, but
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll publish that hopefully next year because this is hot off the presses.
Okay.
Yeah. The one I'm writing right now is about carbonates, naturally fractured carbonates.
I don't even know what that means.
Limestone,
okay.
Right? But instead of fracking it like we're prone to do in this industry, in the US in particular, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. You frack it. But some of these reservoirs have natural fractures. So that's Austin Chalk, that's Saratoga Chalk. And up in Montana, it's the Mission Canyon Reservoir of the Cedar Creek Anticline. So small independent, mid-sized independent came to me a couple years ago and said, these wells are making way too much water. We know there's more oil in the fractures, but once a natural fracture, from geological stresses, once it waters out in a carbonate, the water dissolves the walls of the fracture and the fracture just gets wider and wider and wider until it's a super highway for water. And they can't get any of the remaining oil out of these fractures. So we put some AICV completions in there last fall, about a year ago today. And so we don't know where the fractures are. We don't have a way of logging those. So we'll just divide this well up into 150-foot compartments. I picked that number, and we'll see what we get. And lo and behold, we cut their water production down by about half in both wells. And in one well, it was pretty played out. It was a retrofit. The well had already produced for like 3 or 4 years. So it was kind of, had already made 200,000 barrels. And we kept it on at the same oil rate with less water. Great technical success, but no incremental oil. That's how we want to promote this technology is incremental oil. You'll make more oil. Yeah, less water and less gas, but you can also get more oil. So that was kind of a wash. But the new well we drilled had a 5,000-foot lateral with 30 compartments, swell packers and valves. And we got all the water decline, like the oil rate decline curves for every well in the field. And this is by far the best well they've ever drilled. head and shoulders above every peer in the entire play, and it still makes about half as much water as an offset well. But the real kicker for this paper is that Matt McConnell, shout out, buddy, he calculated that the volume of original oil in place, reservoir engineers call that OOIP, based on the structural enclosure of each of these wells. So it's a faulted reservoir. So you can say this is one side, this is the other, this is the thickness. Therefore, I have this volume of rock times porosity. That's your OOIP.
And do you only get that if you have the two faults on either side?
Yeah, it only works in structural traps. You couldn't do this for unconventionals.
Yeah.
Right? And he said comparing the offset wells to our AICV well, in the first 300 days, our AICV completion had recovered 8% of the OOIP in that time period. In the same time period, for all the offset wells, the best, well, let's say the average was about 4%.
So you doubled the average.
Doubled the average. What does that mean? The first documented case history in the world of accelerated oil recovery from any reservoir based on inflow control technology. So we're pretty excited about the paper.
That is exciting.
Because everybody talks about it. Like, oh yeah, you can get your oil out of the ground faster. Can you prove it? No. It's just a theory, right? We proved it. So yeah, that'll be a good one.
That's super exciting. Congrats.
Thank you. See if anybody reads it. Probably get more people in this podcast paying attention.
Well, if you guys are listening, you want the paper,
the
reach out to.
Will be published at the Canadian Energy Technology Conference in March in Calgary.
Perfect. Man, this has been super exciting. I've actually learned a lot. Where can people go to find out more about you? You're on LinkedIn. You're on Collide as well. I know that.
Yep.
Where can they go to learn more about you or the company?
Oh, InflowControl.org. No, sorry. I got that wrong. InflowControl.no for Norway, right?
Okay.
We would love to have the InflowControl.com domain name, but we don't. That's a different organization. Related, but not our company. InflowControl.no has videos, case studies, you name it, papers galore. There's probably 30 published papers now in this space. But I would say even better than the website is our YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Our YouTube channel has all the produced videos that we have to just show really quickly and simply how the valve works, because I can't explain it with words as well as I can visually. And then there's actually a lecture series on there, like step 1, horizontal well. Step 2, inflow control, ICDs in a horizontal well. Step 3, autonomous inflow control. And it goes through, I think, 9 2-minute videos that are fun to watch on, what the state of the art is in this type of inflow control space, which you didn't know existed until today.
That's interesting. Yeah, if I'll get the link from you. We'll actually upload all those into the search engine as well, so they're discoverable. So if you guys are subscribers of Collide Pro, you search anything around inflow control,
That's right.
You'll find those videos. If you're not, you want a free trial, reach out to me. We'll hook you guys up. Steven, this has been great. It's been a lot of fun. I've learned a lot about Venezuela. So let's do it again sometime.
Oh, yeah? You can do a follow-up anytime you want.
Let's do it.
Thanks, Jake.
Thanks, man.